Hello, everybody. Hope you're doing well. Today, I'm going to continue my series of videos on post war science fiction movies. And today, I'm going to talk about Fahrenheit 451, the adaptation of the classic Ray Bradbury novel. This is my Blu ray I borrowed from the library. This film was released in 1966. It was directed by Francois Truffaut. It starred Oscar Werner and Julie Christie. So, just if you don't already know what Fahrenheit 451 is about, it's a famous dystopian book set in a future where books are banned. Nobody is allowed to read books, and firemen who no longer put out fires, but the job of firemen is to track down books and burn them. That is the genesis of the story. Bradbury wrote this in the late 40s into the 50s, I believe, and clearly the book was inspired by events in Nazi Germany, but also just where book burnings were highly publicized, but even censorship in the Soviet Union, even censorship in America. So it's really just a universal theme, a story about censorship and asking what does it mean to have a society with no literature. So a little bit about the film. Francois Truffaut, famous, very famous director, French director, one of part of the French New Wave of directors. I talked about Jean-Luc Godard and his science fiction film Alphaville. And then a year later, Truffaut also made his science fiction film Fahrenheit 451. And there are some similarities between both films, but it's also a good way to contrast Truffaut with Godard, whereas Godard's film has such a mechanical tone to it, almost in it's a in this depiction of a society with really no creativity at all, just a society with no humanism and what that looks like. And Truffaut is also depicting a society with no literature, but it's completely different. Like there is so much humanism in this movie that Truffaut brings to it, whereas it is about this. Truffaut really focuses on the human need for storytelling and for creative expression in art. So it's very similar to Alphaville, but takes a completely different approach to it in some ways. And this film it's also like Alphaville, it's vaguely futuristic. It looks very much like the world of 1966, but we see a monorail in some scenes, and we get some hints of some futuristic technology, but all that is really kept it's not the forefront of the story. I know in the novel there were famously like mechanical dogs that were part of the story, which were not included in the film. And the film also changed a few things from the novel. And just about the characters in the story. So you have Montag, who's played by Oscar Werner, who is a fireman who is dedicated to his job of tracking down books and burning them. And his life changes when he meets Clarice, played by Julie Christie, who kind of awakens in him a curiosity that he had never had before about books. And Julie Christie plays two roles in the film. She also plays Montag's wife, Linda Montag. And Linda Montag is his wife, and one of the parts of this dystopia is that people are hypnotized by television. And this was way before big screen wall televisions, which are common today. But in the story and in the film, it's suggested that people watch these interactive TV shows all day that are very simplistic and don't really have much to say about anything. They're just very, you know, pointless storytelling. So Montag's wife is involved in television, and meanwhile Clarice, who in the book is a teenager, and it's more of like, I guess, a father-daughter dynamic in the book, but here it's taken a more of a, I mean, clearly Julie Christie was older, and they made the character older, obviously, and there is this little romance between Montag and Clarice in the film, but that's not really necessarily what the film's about. But anyway, one of the things I really liked about this film is the way it uses color, especially primary colors. Just the use of reds is so prominent throughout this movie. Reds and shades of red and yellows and blues. Just a very vibrant looking film. The colors just really pop off the screen, so it really has a great look to it. Um, and the way it films books. And I don't know if I can think of a movie that does a better job at actually filming books. Like we get close-ups when the firemen are throwing the books together, and we can see all the titles, all the classic titles that we're familiar with, whether it's the Brontes or Charles Dickens or you know Dante, or just all these classic books, and to see them all go up in flames, like the way Truffaut films it, it's haunting, but also kind of beautiful in some ways. Where, yeah, a few movies have just really filmed books in such a creative way, and it's really a movie about the love of books. So it's really impressive on those grounds, and also, one thing I liked in the film too, where as Montag becomes to question his job, and at one point in the film, he starts to steal books, take his own books, and take them home and read them, and that's when he really starts to change. He takes David Copperfield by Charles Dickens and starts to read it, but the way it's almost sensuous, the way Truffaut films the books as well, where I was thinking almost like you think of cops in like drug raids, and we hear about, confiscating drugs, and it's almost, and the temptations the drugs could pose. And it's interesting how in this film, how you get the sense how the firemen are constantly feeling tempted to know what's inside the books. And then Montag's boss, who Captain Beatty, who's played by Cyril Cusack, is always explaining why books are banned, and he talks about books make people unhappy, or books make people arrogant, or they don't, they give people unrealistic expectations about life, and that's why people are unhappy. So he gives all these interesting arguments for why books should be banned. So that's there's some great scenes with that. And then there's another scene where Montag, his wife and her girlfriends are kind of watching the TV show, and he just starts reading out of his book, David Copperfield, and almost like the idea of reading being a subversive act, and we don't really think of it that way. Sometimes we do. We hear about banned books all the time. There's threats of books has really escalated in the past few years. But but the film really does a great job of that, of depicting reading as a really subversive activity, something that can get you in trouble. And once again, I can't think of few films that have done a better job of depicting that. There's something about the banality, like we talk about dystopian movies all the time, and this movie, though, it's a banal dystopia where the only hints that we're living in a kind of totalitarian world is the fact that books are burned. We also get hints of it where in the monorail car, like we see people who are fidgety, and I read how Truffaut made that was purposeful, because the idea, if people don't have stories, if people's imaginations aren't being exercised through books, it makes everyone edgy and desperate for connection, but also feeling isolated. So that was interesting too. And not a big parallel, but once again, the parallel to today of how technology can have this hypnotizing effect on everybody. So I liked how the film did that as well. But yeah, it does a good job of showing what a world might look like without books. And the way Truffaut films the firemen, where they look on the one hand slightly menacing but also comical at the same time. You know, like the opening sequence of the film is great, where we follow the firemen in their truck and they break into this home and they start confiscating all the books in the home. It actually reminded me a lot of Minority Report, the Steven Spielberg film, where it's a different type of situation, but the idea of this crew of cops just, and the way it's shot and the way it's filmed reminded me of Minority Report a lot, and how, so that was cool. That was interesting as well. Um, Also, the music score by Bernard Herrmann is a fantastic music score in the film. It's on the one hand, it can be a quirky score at times, but also a very emotional score as well. So it's especially the music that plays over the final sequence in the film is fantastic. And I won't spoil the ending, but this movie really goes towards a really moving ending once we get there. So yeah, a very very good ending. Yeah. It's Truffaut. It's kind of formal. I think the film is methodically paced, but there are fantastic scenes throughout the film, and like I said, I think it would benefit from repeated viewings, because just for the visuals alone and for some of the nuances that are there in the story. So and the cinematography was done by Nicholas Roeg, who would go on to become a, a fantastic director in his own right. And I believe I'll talk about one of his films soon coming up. So, and there's also in the film two allusions to Nazism. It's not it's subtle, no, but Truffaut also puts a lot of subtleties in there with Nazism, whether it's the way the cops act or the the book burnings, of course, but that's always there as well. So yeah, Fahrenheit 451 from 1966, a really good adaptation. Now on the Blu-ray, there is an extra of Ray Bradbury, who is actually a fan of the film, and he even talks about at first he didn't know, he had some reservations with some of the choices made by Truffaut, but ultimately Bradbury really likes the film, really likes his adaptation, Truffaut's adaptation of his book. I know HBO did kind of a TV miniseries a few years ago on Fahrenheit 451, but I'm surprised the story's never been remade. I think once again, right now is probably would be a great time to revisit this story. But this 1966 film is very much worth watching, and yeah, highly recommended. So thanks for watching, and I will talk to you later.